Today is May 30th, 2024. The Mavericks are currently up 3-1 in the conference finals after starting 3-0. Whether or not the Mavericks win this series or blow the biggest lead of all time, the Mavericks are in a good spot. They made it here. They made it to the Western Conference Finals despite missing the playoffs in 2023. And today, we're going to go over how they got here. Not just 2023, but I want to also talk about 2022 and 2021. This is Son of a Sports, and let's get into it. So let's start in the summer of 2021, when the Mavs took on the Clippers, started 2-0, beat LA in both games in LA, and went home to lose two more games. They won Game 5 to go up 3-2, and didn't win another game in that series, and lost in LA in Game 7 for LA's first home game win of the series. It sucked. That series genuinely sucked, because Luka played really well. Almost 36 points per game in that series, 8 rebounds, 10 assists, and a steal. His supposed-to-be second-best player, Kristaps Porzingis, only had about 13 points per game in the series, 5 rebounds, and 1 assist. Tim Hardaway Jr. was the only other player that really helped. He had 17 points per game, and that was really what he was contributing. Porzingis just got dominated, and Dallas was forced to start Boban Marjanovic for 3 games and play him for 4 of them. Dallas had no answer for the Clippers' Ivica Zubac bigs, and in Game 7, you see it here. Luka had 46 points. Hardaway had 11. Marjanovic had 14. Porzingis had 16. Dorian Finney-Smith had 18. They lost by almost 20 here. It was such a disaster, and things looked bad. Right after, Rick Carlisle resigned, the head coach for the Mavericks, who won 2011, their first championship in franchise history with him, and Donnie Nelson was let go. Both of these guys were with them for the championship in 11, and both of these guys were there when Luka was drafted. Then the Mavericks hired Nico Harrison and Jason Kidd. Jason Kidd won in 11 with the team, and Nico Harrison was a former Nike executive that had a good relationship with Luka. Luka was becoming extension eligible. They had to move fast. This roster did not look like it was in a good spot. There were talks about the Clippers just blowing it up after that series, but it changed the Mavericks. There were rumors that Luka might request a trade. There were rumors that this was just all going to be a rebuild immediately. Dallas was going to have to let Luka go. But Nico Harrison and Jason Kidd came in for what was rumored to be one last chance. That offseason, Dallas stuck to their reputation of just staying still, just trying to keep their guys. They're like the Cowboys that way. That was what they were thought to be for a long time. They re-signed Tim Hardaway Jr., re-signed Boban Marjanovic, re-signed Frank Ntilikina, who they got in the Porzingis trade. Reggie Bullock was the big signing of the offseason. Sterling Brown, too. He was a role player from the previous year. That was their big moves. Also, acquiring Moses Brown in exchange for Josh Richardson, giving them a trade exception for later down the road. Dallas wasn't really trying to do much other than bring back the core for next year and see what they could do with money down the road. But Dallas waited to the 2022 deadline, where they were currently the 5th seed at that time, 32-23 in terms of record, and made the big move that no one saw coming. That trade deadline, everyone was waiting to see if James Harden would request a trade, and he did last minute, and he got sent to Philly. But Dallas broke headlines with trading Porzingis to the Washington Wizards. Kristaps and Luka were thought from day one, from when Porzingis was traded to Dallas, to be this nice tandem of European stars that could fit really well together. Porzingis was a shooter. Luka could work with him in a pick-and-roll situation, but it never played out. It never really worked out, and Porzingis was traded away. Whether or not it was because he recovered from his injury or just he didn't really fit in Dallas, we'll never know. Porzingis has said in interviews he just didn't have the right mindset towards it, and there have been rumors for a long time they just didn't have the chemistry. But Dallas in the trade acquired Spencer Dinwiddie and Davis Bertans. At that time, Mavericks fans were really pissed off. I mean, they ended up acquiring 2 guys that were significantly worse than Porzingis, and guys that were on deals that don't expire for a few off seasons. But the thing with the Mavericks that was interesting to see was Mark Cuban was telling everyone, okay, wait and see. This is salary filler for later down the road. These guys are also contributors that could help and surround Luka with some more talent, especially shot creation and catch and shoot play. But at the time, not a lot of people were happy with it, especially in Dallas. And everyone knew Porzingis was struggling in Dallas, but no one wanted to see him go for just something like that. And as we skip to the future towards the 2022 playoffs, let's talk about Brunson real quick before then as well. Jalen Brunson had the ability and was telling the Mavericks he would take a 4-year, $52 million deal. Something extremely cheap for a guy of his player caliber now. He's on one of the best deals in basketball now. At the time, that would have made him probably the best deal in basketball ever. It was a small deal for a player that did have his struggles in the Rick Carlisle era. Him and Rick Carlisle reportedly didn't get along. Carlisle reportedly hurt his development. And once once Jason Kidd was the coach of the Dallas Mavericks, Jalen Brunson took off. And Luka got hurt in the final game of the regular season in 2022. Dallas fans were scared. They were going against Utah. They were the 5th seed. Utah was the 4th seed. It didn't look great, but Jalen Brunson went in and just torched the Jazz in Utah and made it to where Luka could come back and have room to just not worry about carrying the Mavericks in that series. And it worked. The Mavericks won in 6 games in a series where Luka and Brunson both dominated together, and Brunson dominated when Luka wasn't there. That next series, Luka was starting to get more fully healthy, and, well, let's just say Phoenix and the Mavs had some sort of beef there. Dallas was down 3-2 by Game 5. They lost by 30 in Game 5, 110-80. And as you all know, I don't need to show the clips. I don't need to show much of the memes, but Dallas came back and won. Dallas won Game 6 and 7. And this was the first seed Phoenix Suns, who were like 64-18 against the 4th seed. Yeah, they were the 4th seed, not the 5th seed, against Utah. Mavericks that absolutely did not have the talent Phoenix had at that time, or the depth, I should say. But in that series, Luka averaged 33 points, 7 assists, and 10 rebounds, and 2 steals. Brunson averaged like 19, 3, and 4. And in Game 7, I don't think I could put into words what happened in Game 7. An article from The Ringer says, this game was a blowout from start to finish. And yeah, it really was. Luka had 27 points at halftime, just as much as the Suns did. The Suns had 27 points at halftime, with Luka also having 27. It was a defensive masterclass from the Mavericks, trapping Chris Paul, and Devin Booker each and every time they got the ball. Chris Paul had 1 point at halftime. Devin Booker had 2 points. The leading scorer for the Suns had 12 points in Cam Johnson, their backup power forward. And it was just a disaster from start to finish for the Suns. They thought the Mavs would just roll over and die in Game 7, and they didn't. They did not die. They dominated Game 7 and won by 33. But I think at one point they were up like 45. The thing with the Mavericks, though, is they lost in 5 games in the Western Conference Finals. Dream season came to an end. And I wouldn't say in a disaster. It's just the Warriors were better. Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, who was still being risky with his shots, but not the sort of cocky Klay Thompson he is now. And he had a little bit more athleticism to him. Jonathan Kuminga, Jordan Poole, Andrew Wiggins, Draymond, Kevon Looney. Sorry. It's just the team was just better. They were a better team. They were better built for the Mavericks. They weren't built for the Mavericks, but they matched up better. I think Phoenix would have given the Warriors a better series, but the Mavs dominated Phoenix. The Mavs honestly deserved to make the Western Conference Finals, and even though they lost, it was a good year. But it meant a lot of changes were going to have to come in that offseason. And by changes, I mean giving Luka another guy, because Jalen Brunson might have been out the door. So the Mavs went early and tried to trade for Christian Wood, and they did that with guys that didn't play in these playoffs. Boban Marjanovic, Sterling Brown, Trey Burke, Marquise Chris, and their late first in Wendell Moore. They did everything they could to just trade the guys that did not play for them, were not significant to the roster or the rotation, and get Christian Wood, a guy who averaged 16 points the year before then, who showed displays of positive defense, and who could stretch the floor. He looked like he'd be a good fit with Luka, a fit that Porzingis was not able to offer the previous year. And despite the Mavericks' attempts, they couldn't re-sign Jalen Brunson. His dad was on the Knicks coaching staff, and the Knicks offered him a deal that I don't think the Mavericks could have even afforded. I believe it was like a 4-year, $170 million deal. It just wasn't working. It was so done. Like, the deal was so, like, already set in stone. Shams reported it an hour before free agency tampering begins. The league was already, like, investigating the day after, because it was already set in stone for at least a week. The Mavericks just had no shot at re-signing him. And yes, the Mavericks messed up with that contract extension, but at the time, he didn't look like the player he looked like in the playoffs. But as we all know, Brunson did work out for the Knicks. So let's talk about what happened to the Mavericks right after that. Although Jalen Brunson was really, really gone, Luka, Dinwiddie, they were a good fit. Hardaway helped out the previous years. Hardaway did not play in the 2022 playoffs, but they brought him back, and he worked in 2021, so they wanted to see what he could do. Dorian Finney-Smith really worked out. JaVale McGee was a signing to bring back to Dallas after he had one of the most efficient backup center seasons of all time in Phoenix. It was a weird stat. Reggie Bullock was a good shooter for them in the playoffs. Christian Wood was going to be brought off the bench because Kidd didn't really love his defense, but we also knew around the league that Christian Wood would probably be their playoff starter. Dwight Powell was a center that was always a part of Dallas for some reason. Maxi Kleber was a guy that helped out a lot in their playoff run. And Jalen Hardy was a second-round pick that was supposed to be a lottery pick. He just fell and fell and fell because of he was in the G League as a development player, and he just really didn't work out in pre-draft workouts. But Dallas had a rotation that at the time seemed like, okay, this team could be a second-round exit again, but we don't see them being a contender. But Dallas really struggled to start the year, and injuries were starting to catch up to them. At the trade deadline in 2022 or 2023, the Mavericks were 28-26. Luka missed 7 games in a row, and Dallas was like 0-7. Christian Wood was also hurt a bit, and his play time in the rotation was being reduced more and more. It was not looking great for Dallas. They were still the 6th seed because the West was struggling that year, but Dallas had to make a move, and as you can see here, Kyrie Irving was the move. Moving Spencer Dinwiddie, who they got a year before then, and he was making a big contract. Dorian Finney-Smith was a guy that was key to the Mavericks rotation, but someone that also declined in terms of shooting that next year in 2022. They used their 2029 first-round pick unprotected in 2 seconds to go get Kyrie Irving and Markieff Morris. Kyrie Irving obviously had off-the-court issues in Dallas, and there was a lot of concern. But the big thing to note was Dallas was running out of time with Luka, and they had to go get a guy. And their all-in move, in terms of the market value at that time, was pretty cheap. Kyrie Irving's value at that time was probably at an all-time low, but trading 2 rotational guys and a first-round pick for Kyrie Irving was, looking back at it now, a big steal, because the big trade the previous summer for Donovan Mitchell, the big trade for Rudy Gobert, those were big trades, and they went with a lot of firsts. Rudy Gobert was 5 firsts. The market was so backed up by these trades. Kevin Durant, when he requested a trade, nothing could get done because no one could see what type of trade Kevin Durant could be traded for after seeing what Rudy Gobert was traded for. And the trade worked out. I mean, Kyrie averaged a very efficient 27 points per game. Him and Luka looked really good together. You got some really fun nights, but the team's roster outside of that defensively was just awful. The team ended up being around the 8th seed, and at that point, they lost back-to-back games with Charlotte and looked like, I think it was the 10th seed actually. They looked like, okay, well, what do you do here? Like, there's no chance we win a playoff series with this roster. So Dallas made the very controversial decision to tank. They had a first-round pick available if they get it in the top 10 in terms of the NBA lottery, and they had to tank for it. Dallas did everything they could and rested Luka and Kyrie for the rest of the year, so they end up with a top 10 pick for either trade purposes or, as you'll find out later, pick the pick. And Dallas ended the season 38-44 after starting like 28-26, maybe even better than that, and ended up as the 11th seed in the West. The draft lottery was in Dallas's favor because Dallas ended up with exactly the 10th overall pick. They were able to keep it, and what they did with it was decide to use it. Keep it till draft night and only trade back with OKC. They gave them Davis Bertans for the 12th pick and a trade exception. Why would Dallas give a player to OKC? Well, they wanted a trade exception, first of all. Second of all, Davis Bertans was on a bad deal. It was known league-wide. The second he made the 5-year, $80 million deal he made in around 2021, it was a bad deal, and it didn't work out in Washington's favor, and they immediately sent him to Dallas. And Dallas only kept him for trades later down the road. Dallas also used that trade exception to later trade around in draft night and get Rashawn Holmes, a guy that has shown talent to be a big later in the past, and Dallas did need another big. And the 24th pick, they used it on Olivier Maximus Prosper, Omax, a touted wing, 3-and-D wing that offers Dallas a lot of potential down the road to be a Dorian Finney-Smith type of player down the road with a higher upside. Dallas in draft night did not say, let's go get 2 guys, or let's go trade these picks for guys or a big player in the league. They wanted to just trade or draft for talent. Their only trades involved getting more young talent. The Bertans trade allowed Dallas to free up a lot of money, and Grant Williams was a guy that was heavily connected to them going into free agency, and they immediately got after him. A 4-year, $51 million deal is what I believe they signed him for, and Grant was a guy that was supposed to offer 3-and-D on the wing, power forward, and also be small ball center. He played really well for the Celtics in a playoff run in 2022 that made them to the final, that got them to the finals. He had 7 threes in Game 7 in the Eastern Conference or semifinals against Milwaukee to take them to the Eastern Conference Finals. He was really good for Boston, and in 2022-2023, he took a little bit of a regression and definitely got cooked by Jimmy in the playoffs, but he was big for Dallas. He was fit exactly what they needed. They also went after Derrick Jones Jr. and Dante Exum later on in free agency, who've shown in the 2023-2024 season they could be reliable role players on good playoff teams. Dante is more of a three-point shooter now, and a guy that was once considered a bust and went to Europe to go play basketball, came back to the NBA, was a 3-and-D playmaker off the bench for Dallas, and was really good in a backup role behind Luka and Kyrie. Derrick Jones Jr. has been a starter for Dallas all year long, and a guy that was a 3-and-D lockdown defender and a guy that really played better from the three ball than ever in his career in Dallas. Dallas tried making more moves in the offseason, but at the trade deadline in the NBA regular season that year, 2023, this year, Dallas had questions. Dallas was the 8th seed. Their defense was not that good. Grant Williams came into the year a little bit out of shape. It wasn't really working out for Dallas. It did not look very well. So what did Dallas do? Well, they took Grant Williams, a big contract, Seth Curry, a guy they just signed, a first-round pick that they protected, and sent it to Charlotte for a guy that they were connected to in the previous offseason in P.J. Washington, a guy that really wasn't working out for a Charlotte organization that seems like a dumpster fire right now. In all honesty, a dumpster fire. P.J. Washington came into Dallas and started being their 4, and he's bigger than Grant Williams, and bigger and mean taller, not bigger, and he was more in shape. And at the time, going to Dallas, he did not seem like a defender, but Dallas for the rest of the regular season and playoffs, he seems like one of their best lockdown guys, one of the better role players in all of basketball. Dallas was not done at the trade deadline either. They went and got Daniel Gafford for Rashawn Holmes, a guy that I talked about him with the draft thing. They didn't end up playing him in 2023. Kid did not really like him, and he did regress a lot in Sacramento. He did offer a chance at center play, but he didn't really give it. Dallas was playing with Lively and Powell in the rotation, and Holmes wasn't playing. And a 2024 first that they ended up getting, I think, from Houston in the Wood trade. I don't know what trade led to them getting a 2024 first, but they ended up getting it, traded it with Holmes to Washington, and OKC got a swap right with Dallas for 2028's first from Dallas. At the time, ESPN did grade it a C-, and PJ Washington's trade like a D, but Dallas needed another center, and Lively was getting hurt a bit. I think he had a broken nose at that time of the year, and Gafford offered that, another center who was looked at as one of the most underrated guys in the league in terms of offensive play and defensive play. And like I said, Dallas was like 28 and 23 at that point in the year. With Gafford and Washington and guys that were added to their starting lineup, Dallas ended up 22-9 for the rest of the year, ended up with 50 wins and 32 losses, I believe, and ended up in the 5th seed in the West. They were the 8th seed at the trade deadline, ended up as the 5th seed with the 7th best defensive rating from the trade deadline to the end of the year. Dallas right now is in the Western Conference Finals, and Gafford and Washington are also locked down until 2025, 2026 with Luka. Luka is also extension eligible this summer, so that might be handled if all things work out in Dallas. But yeah, this is their big move recently. This was the move everyone's been talking about. But these moves don't happen with every other move I've talked about in the last year especially. Washington doesn't happen without Grant Williams in the OKC trade. And Gafford definitely doesn't happen with the OKC trade leading to the Sacramento trade, leading to that trade. Nico Harrison is cooked in the last, I want to say 2 years. The 2022 offseason was rough. The 2022-2023 season was rough. But a lot of pieces had to come together for Dallas to have the roster they have now. The Kyrie Irving trade could only happen because of the Porzingis trade. The Gafford and PJ Washington trades, I already talked about where they came from. Luka's a key rotational piece. Derrick Jones Jr. did not work out in Chicago, despite having a reputation of being a good role player in the league. He just was played wrong in Chicago and as a small ball center. Dante Exum was out of the league and has come back. Jalen Hardy was looked at as someone that was not very draftable. Tim Hardaway Jr., despite him not being very good for Dallas this year, at all points in his career, he's always looked like a shot chucker. And then there's guys like Derek Lively, who was just overlooked because of poor offensive play in college. But that's just because college centers don't score a lot, especially guys like him who aren't traditional shooters. But Derek has shown in the league he's a great lob threat, a great pick-and-roll presence, and extremely wise for a 20-year-old center in the NBA. Dallas's rotation is made up of guys outside of Luka and Kyrie, of course. Even Kyrie, of guys that were overlooked because they were on bad teams or in bad positions. And Dallas has shown, like the Nuggets, like the Warriors the year they won it, like the Bucks with their guys outside of Giannis and Chris and Drew, having underlooked guys in the right positions, especially at the 4, is how you win championships. That is how you do it. It's how you do it over and over again. That's how you put yourself in these positions. PJ Washington has put himself in the Aaron Gordon club of guys that were former lottery picks that were just overpaid and put in the wrong position at bad teams. I think PJ is an incredible piece. I think Gaff's an incredible piece. And I'm really excited to see what this Mavs team does in the future because a lot of these guys are already under contract for a long time. Derrick Jones Jr. is the main rotational piece that's not currently under contract, and we'll see what happens this summer. So how did we get here? Well, watch the rest of the video, and I hope y'all watch this video. This has been Son of a Sports. Dallas's game 5 tonight. We'll see what happens because, yeah, we don't know. I'm not going to disrespect the Wolves like I already talked about in my other video. But I will say this. Dallas has shown no matter what, despite what happens, no matter what happens, Dallas is a really good team. And Dallas had a good turnaround and has a bright future ahead of them. Dallas has proved that to Luka, to Kyrie, to everyone across the league, that Nico Harrison is a good GM. And if you go check my TikTok, I have harped and crapped on Mark Cuban and his decisions. But what I'll say right now is, job is not done for the Mavericks in this season and for the Mavericks in the offseason, for the Mavericks for the future. Just because they made the conference finals does not mean they shouldn't continue to try to win. They did a good job, though. This has been Son of a Sports. I'll catch y'all next time.